What if I told you that some of the smartest, most durable solutions to our modern-day problems, crumbling infrastructure, food waste, broken plumbing, even heating your home, were already solved over 2,000 years ago, with no electricity, no digital tools, and no modern machines? This isn't ancient trivia. This is survival engineering from a civilization that refused to cut corners. The Romans didn't just build monuments, they built systems so effective. We're still trying to reverse engineer them today. From concrete that grows stronger with age, to mail routes faster than the medieval mind could fathom, they didn't invent to impress, they invented to endure. And while we swipe, stream, and scroll, their forgotten hacks are still quietly outperforming some of our most advanced tech. So the real question is, how did they get it so right? And where did we go so wrong? 1. Roman concrete, made with volcanic ash, lime, and seawater, actually gets stronger over time, unlike modern concrete, used in iconic structures like the Pantheon, still standing after 2,000 years. Seawater enhances durability, opposite of modern concrete's weakness in salt environments. Imagine a world without electricity, without engines, without computers, yet filled with innovations so enduring that they still outperform some of our most advanced modern solutions. Now imagine those innovations were born over 2,000 years ago, forged in the heart of an empire known for its roads, its warriors, and its insatiable ambition. But what if I told you that the true genius of the Roman Empire didn't lie in its conquests, but in the quiet, lasting brilliance of how they solved everyday problems? This isn't just about ancient history, this is about engineering hacks. So effective, we're still borrowing them today, sometimes without even realizing it. From concrete that gets stronger with age, to central heating systems before thermostats were even a dream. The Romans didn't just build cities, they engineered civilizations to outlast the march of time. And that's exactly what this journey is about, uncovering the forgotten tricks of the Roman world that still shape our modern lives. Let's start with something that literally holds up the past Roman concrete. Modern cities crack under pressure, bridges crumble, roads need repaving, buildings demand constant maintenance, but Roman concrete, it shrugs off centuries like it's nothing. The Pantheon in Rome still boasts the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. That's not luck, that's Roman chemistry. And here's the mind-blowing part. Their concrete doesn't just last, it actually gets stronger as it ages. While today's concrete, even reinforced with steel, starts breaking down within a few decades, Roman concrete thrives, especially in salty, humid environments where modern materials fail miserably. How did they pull this off? It wasn't magic, it was volcanic ash, mixed with lime and seawater. This blend formed a chemical matrix that continued reacting over time, sealing cracks and reinforcing the structure from within. Essentially, it was the ancient version of self-healing material. This isn't just useful trivia, it's a rebuke of modern complacency. With all our tools and tech, how did we lose touch with something so durable, so environmentally friendly? While construction companies today struggle to make concrete more sustainable, the Romans had already figured it out. They didn't just build with what they had, they optimized it. Their instinct was backed by trial and error, by careful observation of how materials responded to elements. Today, we need labs and simulations to test durability. Romans just watched the sea, touched the stone, and listened. That's more than intuition. That's a culture of engineering rooted in patience and purpose. Think about the implications. As climate change intensifies and cities face rising sea levels, Structures built with Roman-style concrete could potentially endure where steel and modern concrete fail. The ancient port of Cosa, where Roman piers still stand amid crashing waves, is more than a relic, it's a case study. Why aren't we reviving this method en masse? Partly because we got seduced by speed. Modern concrete is designed to harden fast and build cheap. Roman concrete was slower, but in that slowness was strength. We traded durability for efficiency. Now we pay the price. This isn't about worshipping the past, it's about learning from it. Because in their simplicity, the Romans achieved something astonishing: sustainability without slogans, endurance without steel, elegance without ego. And that's just the first hack. The building's still standing. They're only the beginning. 2. Hypocaust heating system. Ancient underfloor heating in Roman homes and bathhouses. Hot air from a furnace circulated through hollow floors and walls. Wealthy homes had multi-room temperature control, an ancient form of central heating. Now that we've cracked the code on concrete, let's shift from stone to something warmer, something that reveals just how far ahead the Romans were in creature comfort. We tend to think of ancient life as rough, cold, and miserable. But what if I told you the Romans were enjoying toasty, evenly heated homes while most of the world was still huddled around open flames? Let's talk about the hypocaust. Rome's silent marvel, the ancient underfloor heating system that turned stone villas into cozy sanctuaries. Centuries before central heating was even a concept. Picture this: a winter morning in the Roman countryside. Outside, the frost hangs thick in the air, but inside, beneath the mosaic floors of a villa, warm air circulates through brick-pillared chambers. The heat seeps up through the tiles and into the walls, warming every corner. No smoke, no ashes, just radiant, invisible heat, managed by a team of furnace workers tending fires that warmed entire homes from beneath. Sounds modern, doesn't it? That's because it was. The Romans didn't just invent floor heating, they perfected it. These systems weren't experimental novelties reserved for emperors. Middle-class citizens, bathhouse visitors, and even soldiers experienced warmth. They essentially had programmable climate zones long before the word thermostat existed. And the best part? It worked. It still works. In fact, if you visit well-preserved Roman sites in Europe today, you'll see the remnants of systems: raised floors, hollow terracotta wall tubes, ash chambers, all revealing a civilization that refused to accept discomfort. But this wasn't just about staying warm. It was about public health, social cohesion, and architectural mastery. Take Roman bathhouses, grand structures with multiple heated rooms, each at different temperatures. The caldarium for steaming, the tepidarium for gentle warmth, the frigidarium for cooling off. These weren't just hygiene stations, they were social hubs, wellness centers, and status symbols all in one. You see, heating wasn't passive, it was purposeful. The placement of the furnace, the thickness of the walls, the airflow channels, they were calculated. This wasn't brute force engineering. It was finesse. It was art. And that raises a question. In a time when most of the world relied on fire, pits and furs, how did the Romans reach such thermal sophistication? The answer lies in their obsession with systems. They didn't just build buildings, they built processes. They engineered environments where everything from warmth to waste was accounted for. And speaking of waste, wait until you see how they handled sanitation, because if you think the hypocaust was impressive, the Roman sewer system will blow your mind. But let's pause for a second and appreciate the irony. Today, Millions of people in cold climates still struggle with heating inefficiencies, outdated radiators, or high electricity bills. Meanwhile, a system powered by wood fires and convection, designed 2,000 years ago, quietly demonstrates that comfort doesn't always require complexity. In fact, the Romans show us that comfort and sustainability don't have to be opposites. The hypocaust wasn't just an invention, it was a philosophy. Warmth as a right, engineering as empathy. Civilization measured not only by conquest, but by how well it shielded its people from the cold. And as we wrestle with climate control, energy consumption, and affordable housing, maybe it's time to ask, did the past already solve some of the problems we pretend are new? 3. Sewer systems and public toilets. The Cloaca Maxima was a massive, walkable underground sewer. Public toilets seated 20 people, used running water to carry waste, featured a 2-channel water system, waste and cleaning, included early flush toilets in private homes more advanced than some facilities. Centuries later, now let's descend into the guts of the Roman city, the sewers. The toilets, the unseen systems that kept the empire clean while the rest of the ancient world festered in filth. Because while emperors were plotting wars and building temples, Rome's engineers were obsessing over something far less glamorous but far more vital: sanitation. And here's where it gets astonishing. Romans solved urban hygiene problems more than 1,000 years before anyone else even recognized them. Let's start with the Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest sewer systems in the world. A vast subterranean river carved beneath the city of Rome. This wasn't some accidental trench. It was a feat of planning and architecture, a deliberate, fully integrated system that flushed waste away from the heart of the city, out into the Tiber River. Think of it as the cardiovascular system of a living metropolis. Public toilets weren't dirty holes in the ground. Either they were communal, well ventilated, and surprisingly sophisticated. Picture this: long marble benches with strategically spaced openings, fresh water running beneath to carry waste away, and a second stream in front of the seat flowing continuously to wash the hands, or, more accurately, to clean the sponge on a stick. The tessorium. It's a bit unsettling by modern standards, sure, but let's put it in context. Most of Europe wouldn't see anything close to this level of sanitation until the 1800s. The Romans, they were chatting business deals while doing their business side by side, in a kind of ancient boardroom meets bathroom setup. The idea of cleanliness wasn't an afterthought, was woven into the very design of public life. Over 140 public toilets were connected to this immense sewer network, and many were part of bathhouse complexes, markets, and civic centers. Wealthy homes, too, had private indoor toilets, with flush systems powered by continuously flowing water. These early toilets weren't just convenient, they were hygienic. The design kept odors down, prevented buildup, and drastically reduced disease. Even more impressive, the sewers were walkable. Maintenance crews would regularly inspect the tunnels, clear blockages, and make repairs. Some tunnels were over 10 feet high, lined with precision-cut stone blocks, still watertight to this day. That's craftsmanship, that's foresight, and it begs the question, how did we forget this? Why did civilization, after Rome fell, abandon such critical knowledge for over a millennium? Part of it was cultural collapse, yes, but part of it was arrogance. The belief that newer always means better, that progress only flows forward. The Romans remind us that sometimes the past holds solutions we haven't yet surpassed. Their sewer system wasn't just about engineering. It was about respecting the urban citizen's right to cleanliness. about making dense populations livable. They designed cities for human health long before the word public health existed. And today, as we deal with overburdened sewage systems, water shortages, and sanitation crises in rapidly urbanizing areas, Rome's model is more than nostalgic, it's instructional. We spend billions digging new infrastructure when a better question might be, what did the ancients do right? And how can we integrate that with modern materials and needs? The irony is stark. We use AI to track sewer efficiency, but we still struggle to match Roman results. The Romans weren't perfect, but in waste, they saw opportunity. In filth, they engineered flow. And in the darkest tunnels beneath their cities, they laid down one of the brightest examples of how society should serve its people, not with luxury, but with dignity. For food preservation, salting, fermentation, pickling, and use of honey to keep food fresh without refrigeration. Used amphorae, specialized clay jars, to store and preserve food with engineered breathability. Created fermented fish sauces, and vinegar-based preservation methods still in use today. Now that we've seen how the Romans mastered waste, let's explore how they conquered another invisible enemy, spoilage. Because in a world without refrigeration, food preservation wasn't just convenient, it was a matter of survival, especially when your empire stretches from Britain to Egypt. And the Roman solution, genius, practical, and shockingly relevant to today's sustainability crisis. The Romans weren't hoarders, they were curators. They didn't just store food, they preserved it with intention, chemistry, and culture. And while modern households toss out nearly a third of their groceries due to spoilage, the ancient Romans were dining on food that had been kept fresh for months without a single watt of electricity. Their first line of defense was salt, nature's oldest preservative, but the Romans elevated salting into an art form. They didn't just dump it on indiscriminately. They adjusted the ratios, developed regional techniques, and tailored the process depending on the food: pork, fish, olives, even cheese. They had entire curing houses and fermentation facilities where salt wasn't just used to prevent decay, was used to create entirely new flavors. Enter garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce. Sound unappetizing, perhaps, but it was everywhere, drizzled over vegetables, mixed into stews, even used as a condiment at elite banquets. Garum wasn't just food, it was infrastructure, and it lasted. The stuff could survive months of storage and weeks of travel across the Mediterranean without losing its flavor or going rancid. How? Because the Romans understood fermentation before microbiology had a name. Their food preservation methods weren't just practical, they were scientific, born from generations of observation. And then there were the amphorae, massive clay jars that weren't just containers, but engineered vessels. Their porous surface allowed controlled evaporation, which helped concentrate flavors and kept bacteria out. Different shapes, sizes, and clay types were designed for different contents: wine, olive oil, grains, fruits. If you've ever seen someone organize their spice drawer by alphabetical order, you've met the spirit of a Roman food merchant. And get this, they even used honey, nature's miracle ingredient. Honey's antibacterial properties made it perfect for preserving fruits, nuts, and delicate herbs. Today, science confirms that honey can last thousands of years without spoiling. The Romans just knew it worked. Add vinegar into the mix, used to pickle everything from cucumbers to egg sand. You get a food system that didn't just survive, it thrived. This wasn't about gourmet luxury. It was about logistics, about feeding armies and populations reliably. It was the original meal prep movement, except instead of glass containers, they had ceramic urns sealed with wax and linen. What's wild is how many of these methods still exist today. Salt curing, fermenting, pickling suddenly popular again in trendy kitchens and sustainability blogs. But the Romans weren't rediscovering anything. They never lost it. They just did it because they had to. And maybe that's what we've forgotten, that necessity breeds not only invention but preservation. In a time when the global food system wastes more than it feeds, when refrigeration devours electricity, and when supply chains collapse under pressure, the Roman approach whispers a bold reminder. Maybe high-tech isn't always better. Maybe the answers are buried in amphorae, aging quietly, waiting for us to notice them again. 5. Sanitized drinking water via wine mixing. Water was often unsafe. Romans mixed it with wine, 2 to 3 parts water to 1 part wine to kill bacteria. Even children drank diluted wine. Soldiers drank posca, mix of vinegar and water for hydration and safety. So far, we've seen how the Romans built stronger, lived warmer, and ate smarter. But what about the most essential resource of all? Water. Not just having it, but trusting it. Because here's the truth. In ancient Rome, drinking water could kill you just as easily as thirst could. Wells were often contaminated, surface water unpredictable, and yet millions of people had to stay hydrated every single day. So what did the Romans do? They pulled off something that feels both shocking and oddly familiar. They turned to wine. Not for indulgence, but for survival. The Romans realized something groundbreaking long before modern epidemiology confirmed it. Alcohol could purify water. So they started mixing wine with water, not to get tipsy, but to make the water safe. Typical ratios: 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine. The result? A mildly alcoholic, bacteria-resistant drink that kept people alive without knocking them off their feet. Even children drank diluted versions of this mixture. It wasn't taboo. It was science without the lab coats. Think about that. At a time when most societies either gambled with dirty water or boiled it inefficiently, if at all, Romans were using fermentation as water treatment. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it worked well enough to sustain a sprawling population. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. These weren't boring drinks. Romans infused their diluted wine with honey, mint, herbs, and spices. They created regional blends. Soldiers had their own mix called posca vinegar, water, and sometimes wine designed for hydration, digestion, and even morale. Essentially, the Romans were crafting what we'd now call functional beverages or hydration elixirs. Except they weren't selling them in trendy wellness stores, they were rationing them to the front lines of battle. Workers, too, had access to these drinks. Strong wine was reserved for leisure and ceremony. Daily consumption was calculated, monitored, and adapted to social roles. The goal wasn't intoxication, it was endurance, purification, efficiency, and, in a surprising way, equality. The poorest citizens, who couldn't afford clean water, could still access safe hydration through shared diluted wine. What the Romans created wasn't just a beverage, it was a drinking culture rooted in public health. Today, we pasteurize, chlorinate, filter, and fortify. But we also drink bottled water flown across oceans, soft drinks packed with sugar, and alcohol for recreation without regard for its roots in sanitation. Meanwhile, Rome whispers a subtle truth through time, that the line between pleasure and survival is thinner than we think. They didn't drink diluted wine because it was trendy, they did it because it was necessary. And yet they made it delicious, practical, safe, consistent. As we face global water crises, pollution, and the collapse of aging infrastructure, it's worth remembering that the Roman solution wasn't more complexity, was calculated simplicity. A fermented grape, a splash of water, a culture that drank wisely long before it was fashionable. 6. Aqueducts and plumbing. Massive aqueduct networks used gravity-powered precision engineering to move water long distances, maintained minimal gradient slopes over miles. Rome had 11 major aqueducts supplying over 300 million gallons a day. Supplied homes, fountains, baths, and toilets. Many still function today. Now that we've tasted how the Romans drank to survive, let's follow the water back to its source. Big, 'cause none of their sanitation, heating, cooking, or bathing hacks would have been possible without one of their most astonishing achievements, the aqueducts. If Roman concrete was the skeleton of the empire, and its roads were the arteries, then aqueducts were the lifeblood. These towering marvels didn't just carry water, they carried civilization. And here's the kicker: they did it without pumps, without motors, without pressure systems, just gravity, pure, precise, relentless gravity. Roman engineers carved valleys, tunneled through hills, and spanned mountains to deliver fresh water to cities, farms, fountains, and public baths, all with slopes so gentle they dropped only a few feet per mile. Think about the precision that takes. Today, we use satellite-guided laser technology to measure elevation. The Romans used levels, ropes, and sightlines and still achieved a level of accuracy we often struggle to match. One of the most famous examples, the Aqua Claudia, ran more than 45 miles from the springs outside Rome, delivering millions of gallons of clean water every single day. And this wasn't just a trickle, it was a torrent. At their peak, Roman aqueducts supplied over 300 million gallons daily to the city of Rome alone. That's roughly 50 gallons per person per day, better than what many modern developing cities can guarantee. But aqueducts weren't just pipes in the sky. They were feats of civil art, vaulted stone arches stretching across valleys like giant bridges, carefully cut channels that curved through mountains, underground tunnels lined with waterproof cement, and all of it flowed continuously, 24/7, powered by nothing but the slope of the land and the minds of the people who shaped it. The real magic: the water didn't just serve the elite. Public fountains provided free access to drinking water. Bathhouses operated on a municipal water grid. Even some public toilets were flushed by aqueduct water. This was infrastructure as public good, not private luxury. Compare that to today's global battles over water rights, bottled water monopolies, and failing municipal pipes. The Romans saw water not just as a resource, but as a responsibility, and they treated it with the reverence it deserved, rooting it carefully, protecting it structurally, distributing it equitably. Maintenance was part of the plan. Aqueducts were inspected, cleaned, and reinforced routinely. Engineers were trained specifically for aqueduct construction, and their techniques were taught, copied, and improved upon across the empire. This wasn't a lucky fluke, it was policy, it was science, it was scale. The aqueduct wasn't just a pipe, it was a promise. And that's what we've lost in many parts of the world. Today, when water systems break, people suffer silently or blame politics. But the Romans knew better. They built redundancies. Multiple aqueducts served the same cities. Springs were tested. Flow rates were monitored. The goal wasn't to sell water. It was to deliver life. In a world where climate disasters, population booms, and infrastructure neglect threaten global water supplies. Maybe we need to stop thinking about innovating and start thinking about returning, not to the past, but to its priorities. Aqueducts weren't just channels, they were declarations that civilization rises and falls not by the sharpness of its swords, but by the clarity of its water. 7. Road system. Over 250,000 miles of roads built with a multi-layered drainage and paving system. Roads had standard widths, mile markers, and long-lasting construction, enabled military logistics, trade, and cultural exchange across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now that we've followed Rome's aqueducts as they poured civilization into every corner of the empire, it's time to look at the very veins that carried that civilization across 3 continents, the roads. But calling them roads doesn't quite do them justice. These weren't dusty trails stamped by wandering merchants. Roman roads were meticulously layered, obsessively measured, and strategically aligned with military brilliance. They weren't just for getting from point A to B. They were the connective tissue of an empire built, not to fade, but to endure. And here's the wild part. Many of them still do. Beneath modern highways, village lanes, and scenic footpaths lie ancient Roman stones, still bearing weight, still shedding rain, still showing us what happens when you build not for convenience, but for forever. So how did they do it? First, they started with a foundation. Literally, Roman roads began with a deep trench filled with compacted sand or clay for drainage. Above that came layers of crushed stone and gravel, laid in deliberate thicknesses to distribute weight and prevent collapse. And then came the finishing layer, tightly fitted paving stones, each hand-cut, each locked in place like pieces of a continent-sized jigsaw puzzle. No shortcuts, no loose ends. These roads were engineered to drain water, resist erosion, and carry military supply wagons, horse traffic, and marching legions for centuries. And they did. With over 250,000 miles of total roadway, including more than 50,000 miles of stone-paved highways, Rome didn't just map the empire, they built it. Roads stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the sands of North Africa. They were measured, marked with milestones, and documented with obsessive accuracy. Every major city, garrison, port, and trade hub was linked into this network. It was the first global highway system, and it worked. But it wasn't just engineering, it was philosophy. Roman roads didn't snake lazily across the land. They cut straight through it. Mountains, carve them, swamps, drain them, valleys, bridge them. The empire didn't ask the earth for permission, it imposed geometry on nature. And in doing so, it created a world where time and distance shrank, where armies moved faster, trade expanded quicker, and ideas traveled farther than ever before. The roads weren't just physical, they were cultural. Soldiers brought law, language, and custom with every march. Merchants brought goods and gossip. Travelers brought curiosity and change. The Roman road wasn't just a path, it was a portal. And the maintenance, ruthless. Roads were regularly repaired by local municipalities or military detachments. Standards were enforced, widths were measured, drainage was checked. You didn't just build a road, you kept it alive. Compare that to today, where potholes eat tires in just a few months, and infrastructure bills stall in bureaucratic mud. Modern roads buckle under pressure. Roman roads defied it, and many still do. Walk certain routes in Italy, Spain, or France today, and your feet will trace the very same stones that once bore the weight of centurions. Think about that. We're building roads that crumble before their paint dries. They built roads that outlived entire nations. The Roman secret wasn't magic. It was discipline, standards, consistency, and a belief that what connected people physically could also bind them culturally. Their roads didn't just move bodies, they moved civilization. Today, when we speak of infrastructure as an investment, the Romans would have nodded in approval, but only if we were willing to match their ambition. Because to them, a road was never just a road. It was a line in stone saying, "We are here, and we intend to last." 8. Military food system. Soldiers carried nutritious, portable rations, hardtack, dried meat, cheese, and grain. Had portable mills and ovens for baking fresh bread in the field. Used standardized recipes and adaptable ingredients. Field food included posca and energy-dense rations, designed for long campaigns. So now we've walked the roads that connected Rome's empire. Let's focus on the people who marched them, the Roman soldiers, and more specifically, how they marched, and more importantly, how they ate. Because it's one thing to build roads across continents. It's another to move an army across them, day after day, month after month, without falling apart from hunger, sickness, or exhaustion. And here's where the brilliance of Roman logistics comes into focus. The Roman military didn't just conquer, it planned. And that planning extended all the way to what went in their soldiers' stomachs. Forget the fantasy of gruel and scavenged rations. Roman legions operated with a kind of culinary foresight that rivals today's military supply chains. These weren't desperate bites, they were balanced meals packed with nutrients, engineered for portability, longevity, and morale. So what did the Roman soldier eat? Start with the basics: dried meat, hard cheese, barley, and buccellatima, dense, twice-baked biscuit that today would be filed under emergency rations, but was once the backbone of a fighting force. Add in lentils, nuts, dried fruits, olive oil, and sometimes wine. These were carefully chosen not just for flavor, but for shelf life, weight, and energy yield. The average Roman soldier consumed around 3,000 calories a day. That's the intake of a modern athlete, not a starving conscript. And unlike some armies that relied on supply lines, the Romans brought their kitchens with them. Portable grain mills with standard equipment. Soldiers ground wheat into flour and baked their own bread in camp ovens. They didn't just eat to survive, they cooked to fight. This created an incredible advantage, a well-fed army that didn't have to pillage or rely on fragile supply chains. They were mobile, self-sustaining, and always ready. Think of it like ancient meal prep, but instead of mason jars and quinoa, it was iron pots and portable hearths. And then there was posca, the humble vinegar water drink that kept troops hydrated, boosted digestion, and killed off bacteria. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, and it was everywhere. The same discipline that built roads and aqueducts flowed into food. Recipes were standardized. Training manuals included cooking techniques. Units rotated cooking duties. This wasn't just about nutrition. It was about routine, order, and shared responsibility. Morale, too, was baked in literally. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was ritual. The smell of baking bread in the morning camp must have been the scent of civilization, even on the edge of the frontier. And here's where the genius shines. These rations were adaptable. Local vegetables, meats, or spices could be added in when available. The meals could be upgraded, stretched, or diversified depending on terrain and climate. It was a set of rigid rules, but a living, flexible protocol that let the Roman army thrive in Gaul, Judea, Britannia, and beyond. What does this tell us? That the Romans didn't see soldiers as disposable, they saw them as critical machines of empire, and, like any machine, they needed the right fuel. It's a lesson we still grapple with today. Logistics aren't glamorous, but they win wars. They hold systems together. They make endurance possible. The Romans understood that to conquer the world, you don't just need weapons, you need calories. And more than that, you need a plan for every single one of them. 9. Cursus Publicus, the postal system. Relay-based courier system with stations every 10 to 20 miles. Delivered imperial orders, census data, and legal documents efficiently. Stations had rest houses, horse supplies, and security measures. Enabled centralized governance and empire-wide communication. ChatGPT, GNOI. Let's now zoom out from the disciplined chaos of military camps and turn our eyes to something far more delicate, yet equally powerful, the ancient Roman postal system. Because while armies marched and roads stretched endlessly into the horizon, it was fast, reliable communication that truly held the empire together. And Rome didn't just create a mail service. They built the first express delivery network. In history, a logistical masterpiece called the Cursus Publicus. No trucks, no satellites, no email, just men on horseback, relay stations, and an obsession with efficiency that still puts some modern services to shame. Here's how it worked. Every major Roman road had official mutations and mansion Israeli posts and rest stations, spaced about every 10 to 20 miles. Each one stocked with fresh horses, rested couriers, and supplies. When a dispatch from the emperor or a military commander needed to get across the empire, it didn't wait, it flew. A courier would ride full speed to the next station, hand off the message, and another rider would launch forward without missing a beat. This relay method allowed sensitive, strategic information to cross the entirety of Roman-controlled Europe. In record time, messages could travel from Rome to the English Channel in just over 40 days. In today's standards, that might sound sluggish, but in the ancient world, it was warp speed. But this wasn't just about fast horses. It was about layers of access. Urgent military orders got priority lane-stop horses, the best riders, expedited routes. Legal and tax documents traveled slower, census records slower still. It was a tiered system, balanced by need and authority. Sound familiar? It should. It's the blueprint for modern postal logistics, priority shipping, and bureaucratic chains of command. And there was more. These relay stations weren't just pit stops, they were intelligence hubs. Riders delivered messages and collected local updates, economic data, weather reports, political developments. That information was then packaged and passed upward, creating a centralized awareness of the entire empire's health, tensions, and threats. It was the world's first feedback loop at imperial scale, and yes, security was taken seriously. Official documents traveled with government seals, personal identification passes, and sometimes armed escorts. Not just anyone could use the Cursus Publicus. This was state machinery, tightly controlled. But that didn't make it rigid. Private citizens could send letters to, using unofficial networks of merchants, travelers, and hired couriers, creating a parallel mail economy, not unlike what we see today with private shipping companies. Imagine this for a moment. 2,000 years ago, a provincial governor in Gaul could receive orders from Rome that same month. A military commander in Syria could report a rebellion before it spiraled. Information wasn't lost in the wilderness. It flowed. And because of that flow, the empire held, until it didn't. Because here's the kicker. When Rome fell, the cursus publicus fell with it, and suddenly Europe entered a dark age, not just of lost luxuries, but of lost communication. The arteries of governance were severed. For centuries, letters vanished into forests, edicts were outdated by the time they arrived, and rulers ruled blind. The fall of Rome wasn't just political, it was postal. It reminds us that empires aren't just maintained with walls and swords. They're held together by whispers that arrive on time. The Romans understood that better than anyone. Fast communication wasn't a luxury, it was survival. It was intelligence. It was empire insurance. Today we scroll through instant messages and curse when a package is delayed by a day. The Romans, riding through rain and rebels, built a system that delivered not just scrolls, but stability. Their lesson: if you want to hold the world together, make sure your words get there first. 10. Legal system. Originated concepts like presumption of innocence, evidence-based rulings, and contract law. The 12 Tables, Rome's first public legal code, accessible to all citizens, enabled property rights, inheritance, and business. Transactions, Roman legal principles still form the foundation of civil law systems worldwide, and now we arrive at the final, perhaps most quietly revolutionary Roman hack of all, not built with stone or fire or bronze, but with ideas etched into tablets and minds. We've talked about infrastructure, engineering, logistics, but what truly outlived the empire? Law, because long after the aqueducts cracked and the legions disbanded, Rome's legal system kept breathing through monarchies, republics, revolutions, and modern constitutions. The Romans didn't just build structures, they built structure itself. They asked, how should people live together? Who owns what? What's fair? What happens when someone breaks the rules? And then they did something radical. They wrote it all down. The 12 Tables, created around 450 BC, were the beginning, not royal decrees, but codified, accessible rules that applied to everyone. For the first time, law wasn't just something the powerful whispered in courts. It was public, teachable, debatable. It was the foundation of civil society, and from there, Roman law evolved into something shockingly modern. Property rights, inheritance, contract enforcement, liability, all Roman concepts. Even the idea that someone is innocent until proven guilty, that's Roman. The right to legal representation, Roman. Proportional punishment, Roman. Think about how extraordinary that is. A world where law governed not by the whim of rulers, but by precedents, arguments, documents, and procedures, where courts followed steps, where people could challenge unfair decisions. This wasn't perfect. Prom had its injustices, its power, imbalances, but the framework was unprecedented. And most importantly, it endured. As the Western Empire collapsed, its laws traveled into the Eastern Empire, into medieval kingdoms, into Renaissance Europe. Civil law systems in France, Germany, Spain, and much of Latin America are still rooted in Roman principles. The U.S. Constitution may be shaped by English common law, but Roman ideals echo throughout. Why does this matter? Because law is the ultimate infrastructure. You can build roads and aqueducts, but if you don't build trust rules that people believe in, systems that enforce them fairly, everything collapses. And Rome, for all its brutality and ambition, understood that rules weren't chains. They were scaffolding. They weren't static either. Roman law evolved constantly. New precedents were added, old laws repealed. Philosophers and jurists debated. Their meanings expanded their interpretations. It wasn't dogma, it was discourse, and that openness made it strong. It made it last. We talk today about rights, about freedom, about justice, but we rarely ask where those ideas were born. Not just in revolutions and constitutions, but in scrolls scribbled in dusty Roman courts, where jurists asked, "How can this be fairer?" And while their answers weren't always right, the fact that they asked, that they built a system for asking is why their influence endures. So here's the final Roman hack. When you build something, don't just make it strong. Make it understandable. Make it fair. Make it adaptable. Make it last not through power, but through principle. Because armies fade, buildings fall, even empires crumble. But laws, good laws, they echo across continents, across centuries, across lives. That is Rome's real legacy, not in marble, but in minds. And now, after all, 10 parts from concrete to courts, heating to highways, we stand before a clear truth. Rome didn't survive because of its armies. It survived because of its ideas. The Romans didn't ask how to do something the fastest or the cheapest. They asked how to do it right. And maybe that's the lesson we need most today. In an age obsessed with innovation, we forget to study what already worked. The Romans remind us, build to last. Think in systems. Design for everyone. Respect the basics. Their hacks weren't hacks at all. They were wisdom dressed in stone and fire. And some of that wisdom still runs beneath our cities, our laws, and our lives. The question now is, will we keep listening? Asterisk, the Roman Empire's most enduring innovations weren't about conquest or grandeur. They were about solving problems with purpose and vision. As we face modern challenges, crumbling infrastructure, water crises, food waste, broken communication, and eroding trust in institutions, maybe it's time to stop reinventing the wheel and start remembering how the Romans made it roll in the first place.